All right, everybody, this is the one that you have been waiting for. Welcome back to our Minds of Markets podcast here. Talk about some of the brightest minds that you can get from the trading floors to the trading desks. Well, we've got them here for you today. This is someone that I know you're going to recognize. And if you don't, it's just because you haven't been watching anything on any of the financial networks or reading anything in the news. But I am so happy to have as my guest, my friend, Mr. Scott Shellady today. Many of you may not even know his name, but you certainly recognize what he's wearing. He is the cow guy. Scott, how you doing, man?
You say it like that, it seems kind of corny, but yeah, I'm good. I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. We are so excited to have you. And, I've got to do this with all of my friends and guests that come on. So I've got to give a quick bio, and you can, say yay or nay when I hit something here. But this guy right here, guys, Scott Shellady, he is the internationally recognized brand of, like we said, the cow guy. He's host of the Cow Guy Close on RFD TV, which, Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, it's one of the largest subscriber bases on cable TV, I think. Is that right?
Well, yeah, it's the number one rancher and farming, number one rural television station on cable.
There we go. He this one scares me a little bit. He's an adjunct professor of finance at DePaul back from 2015, and he got his licks in on the trading floor. Quite frankly, he's got a little bit of a backstory before that. But Scott and I met up on the floor of the CME some years ago, and have done a lot of broadcasting together. You can see him every day on his show. Again, he's all over the major networks. But what I love most about Scott is he's not just this celebrity, if you will. He is someone that I respect, that is one of the go-to people in this industry, especially if you're talking about things in the ag space, the commodity space. But you get to the macro picture, and Scott, I just did a piece with you about an hour ago on your show. You hit everything, and when it comes to economics, that's what you should have been a professor in, was economics. You've got your finger on the pulse. So what I'm going to ask you, and I know you've told this story just 1,000 times, if not more than that, but I want my listeners and viewers to hear. How did you get to be the cow guy? What was your progression up to that? There's got to be a backstory to that.
There is, and the answer is that I'm the second cow guy. My father graduated in 1962 and got a job in Des Moines, Iowa with Cargill, and that's where I was born. And my father went up the ranks at Cargill. We moved to Minneapolis, and then from Minneapolis, my father did well enough that they gave him he was a floor manager for Cargill in Chicago in 1971.
Wait, you mean he worked pretty hard and instilled that upon you?
Yeah, well, 100%. Yeah. So, and okay. to make matters, to drive home the point a little bit more, in 1972, he bought a farm in northwest Illinois near Galena, and put my brother to work on that very early. So I've been in a barn since I was probably 8 years old, and so the way the jacket comes about is that my father was trading corn for Cargill, and then he went on his own in 1975. But he loved cows. We had 200 head of Holsteins that he milked twice a day. We didn't live on it full time. We did a lot, but we went back and forth from the city to Galena, which was about a 2.5 hour drive. And I learned a lot about life and death, animals dying, birth, genetics, how to make money with animals, how to make money with crops, grain. It's its own mini business. But to make a short story long, my father wanted to instill upon the visitors at the Chicago Board of Trade that we weren't just gambling. And so he started wearing a black and white jacket like the one I have on. I have a bunch of them now, but so that people would ask questions when they came to the visitors gallery. And then he wrote up what he thought would be the 20 most frequently asked questions. This is in the late 70s, early 80s. and gave it to the guard that used to guard the visitors gallery, at least usher people through, basically turning the guard into a museum docent, right? Like giving answers to these questions. And so what's the guy doing with the cow jacket in the pit? Well, he just wants you to know that he's setting, it's an important economic function down there. They're not just gambling. He's setting the price of food. And that went along for probably 20 years. I went to London. My father and I ended up being partners when I came back from London. I traded in London for 16 years. But when I came back, he was about to retire, and he said to me one day, he's like, "Hey, why don't we be partners for my last year?" And I'm like, "That's awesome."
You were like LeBron and Bronny. What LeBron and Bronny coming out here?
Right. And so, best year of my life professionally. Had the most fun ever, standing in a trading pit with your dad, sharing at that, trading with your dad. I mean, it was amazing. But then when he retired, I thought, you know what? Maybe I'll put on his jersey, wear it like a game-worn jersey. But at the same time, as you remember, probably so, there was a big rush into the commodity markets as far as media and hedge funds. Actually, hedge funds first. The hedge funds started using commodities, and then because of all the money that came into commodities, the media shortly then followed after, okay? And so my dad had retired. I'm standing in the corn pit wearing the cow jacket. So CNBC, CNN, Fox, they want to know, what's that guy wearing the cow jacket for? And so it kind of, and I didn't have a grand plan. I just wanted to be different because in our business, there's a ton of guys wearing blue suits, white shirt, red tie, blah, 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 blah. And I thought, if I'm going to break in, I got to have something different. How am I going to make people listen to me? Anyway.
So and how many times, even as a new guy, how many times did a broker notice you because you stood out, right? When maybe you weren't able to participate.
Absolutely. So it served two purposes on both television and in the pit for attracting attention. And I used to think of myself, because I traveled a lot living in London, walking down the concourse at an airport, right? Whatever, where you go by all those gates that have all those TVs on, and you just see one boring commentator after another. I'm like, I don't want to be that guy. I want to be somebody up there. I want some people to go, wait. First, I want them to say, what is he wearing? I want them to stop, and then I get a chance to have them listen, right? And so one thing led to another, and as the business has evolved, I slowly but surely moved more and more out of trading and into media, and then I was lucky enough to have RFT TV offer me a full-time job when I came back from London with my own show, and we're now the number one rated live show on their network.
And I'm proud to say that at a couple times I've actually been able to sit on that anchor desk as you have been out gallivanting around and doing your speeches everywhere. So I appreciate that opportunity. But I know that the viewership for that is just off the charts. But that's when we first met, when you were transitioning, I think, from the floor into more media, because we used to see each other on the floor of the CME, and we used to do some media hits together. And whether it's the transition from the floor to what you're doing or the floor to screen trading, not an easy transition for probably any of our comrades that we used to trade on the floor with. I mean, I know probably 9 out of 10 people that tried to make the transformation from physical live auction trading on the floor to the screens and couldn't do it. So, regardless of what the transition was, you've obviously been, major home run with it.
Well, I got lucky because I did go to London in 1990 when I was 24 years old. And I saw there that there was a big competition between back in the day, it was called the DTB. It was a German exchange, the Deutsche Börse, and the Life Exchange, which was where I was at in London, because the Deutsche Börse was 100% electronic and we were 100% open outcry. But we being Life in London also had all the volume for their Bund, their 10-year instrument, the Bund Babel and Schatz. They had all the volume for all of them. And so this tiny electronic exchange in Frankfurt was always nipping at the heels of the Life Exchange to try to get back their homegrown product, which I don't blame them. I don't blame them. And in 1997, on a Friday afternoon, the exchange just said on Monday morning we're 100% electronic. And that's when I knew that there was an end game here, and you had to make sure that you had another lily pad to jump on, or you were going to have it was going to be hard to be that 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 20 guys that made the transition to the screen, because that's a whole different thing. You got to relearn your craft, because you're not standing in between a buy broker and a sell broker all day, which made it easy.
And now your guy jacket doesn't mean jack.
It doesn't mean anything. No, it doesn't mean anything. And so that was a great big lesson that I learned a lot earlier than everybody else in Chicago and New York did. And so when I came back to London or to Chicago, I made sure that I kept a foot firmly in that media thing, because I thought maybe someday it would pay off, and it did.
You had the foresight to do that, and kudos to you for that. Going back a little bit to growing up and your entry into this business, how do you explain to someone that is not familiar with agriculture, and I'm not even talking about in a trading sense, but how do you explain to someone how important the farmer is to what we do, to how our world, and specifically here in the U.S., how that sustains daily everything we do? That the farmer's not just out there getting crops and putting things on the market. There's a means to an end, right? And the farmer has to be able to deliver goods. They have to make a profit, and our markets, I think, are essential to that. How would you explain that to someone?
Well, I would argue that the CME and the Chicago Board of Trade at the time when they were founded were founded for the farmer. I mean, it was to try to take out the seasonality of prices, right? And back in the day when it was only cash, what do you think the price of a bushel of corn was the day you took it out of the ground? Well, there's a lot of other bushels going to market too, right? So you had that seasonality where you get absolutely killed in the fall when there was high prices in the spring, but you didn't have anything to sell. So the exchanges were really made for the farmer. And the rancher, for that matter, and so I would say this: it's a vocation. Yes, you can get rich doing it, but it's more like owning a sports team. You get rich on the asset appreciation of the land and and you try to scratch a living out while the asset appreciates. Just like anybody that owns like the Clippers or something, that might not make money year over year in basketball, but the value of that team goes up, and that's where you get your compensation from. And a lot of times you pass it on to your family member, so you don't even get to realize the benefits of all your hard work. But the reason why I say that is because it's difficult. You have to worry about Mother Nature. There's no guarantee of a profit every year. It's the only business where you can do everything right and lose money. And so that's why there's only 1% of the people feed the world, and that's farmers are only 1%. So that's because it's so hard. And so that's why I got to give them credit, because, look, I've been in trading rooms in Tokyo. I ran a Japanese bank in London for 4 years. I've been in all over Europe as far as trading rooms, and as well as New York and Chicago. And there's only 3 things that we can trade in this world, really. And there's thousands of derivatives. But the basic 3 are agricultural stuff, fixed income or interest rates, right? Those are the same thing. Currency, anything that interest rates is, bonds, bonds, and then the last one is stocks. So equities, interest rates, and commodities. There's nothing else to trade in the world. Now you have cash on that. You have options on that. You have every other derivatives in the world. I'm telling you, to a man, agriculture ended up kind of being like the bowling league of those 3 things. Not as much respect. They didn't make as much money because the equity team was trading a much deeper market, and they have a budget of $50 million. If they hit their budget on the equity desk at 25 guys, I'm sure. I mean, you were at Goldman Sachs. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Those guys had big bonuses to split, right? But the ag world isn't that big. You could see if a bushel of corn is $5 today, and we're gonna have 15 billion bushels at the end of the year. Well, that's what's that? That's $75 billion for the entire crop. Well, Apple's got that in their checking account. I mean, Apple could buy the entire U.S. corn crop this year if they wanted to. So it's a much smaller market. But because it's smaller and you got Mother Nature and more unpredictable things, it ends up being the commodity traders ended up a lot of times being better traders than the interest rate guys and the equity guys. Interest rate guys traded off of a calendar just like the equity guys. What's being released today? When's the Fed going to talk? What stock reports today? All of that stuff, they trade off of a calendar. Yes, they get surprised with an assassination year or a war starting there. Yeah, every now and again, but not like the Mother Nature guy gets surprised out in the field. And so when Mother Nature's involved, you're a different trader. And I thought over the years, having had a background in commodities, I just felt as though the commodity guys on those desks in those big banks all over the world were kind of the better traders, but they just didn't get paid for it because it wasn't as sexy.
So not to get too far into the weeds of how things are priced, especially options, but typically in the equity world, there's calls, there's puts, and there's typically a skew to the downside, right? People want that protection. So there's typically a put skew. Isn't that reverse, though, with commodities? Isn't that skew totally to the upside and because of Mother Nature?
Yes, and because of government programs, because you're going to have insurance, crop insurance. So there's a floor. Crop insurance is a put. So you already have a built-in put. So the put skew is flat, and the call skew is the one that's through the roof, just like the opposite of equities. Because who knows? I mean, if you're a consumer of if you're General Mills or you're a Pillsbury, you need the grain. You run a big risk if you don't get a hold of it. I mean, it could really screw up your balance sheet. So the call skew is the one that's steep. Like in the equities, I'm sure the put skew gets steep, every now and again.
Yeah, absolutely. And just look at cocoa right now, right?
There you go. Good example.
Seriously, that's pretty ridiculous where we are there. But there is such a nuance, right? You mentioned that commodity traders might be, better than fixed income or stock equity traders. It's a different type of trade because my mentality is always looking at the skew to the downside. So if I see that inverted at all, I see an opportunity. But if you're going to go into the ag space, into the commodity space like that, you have to have a total different mindset because that's the way the math works.
Yeah, and I mean commodities are also different because we regrow our stock every year, right? There's only a fixed amount of IBM stock, right? But every year we regrow corn, beans, wheat, and whatever. So it's also different that. I mean, there's much more seasonality built in than you would see in, say, stocks. Because you're regrowing something that we need. If it doesn't come out well, then we don't have it. What are we going to do? The price goes through the roof. That spurs on more growing the next time around, and then all of a sudden it crashes. I mean, that's why that the commodities space, it's a lot smaller. I just showed you an example of one company on the New York Stock Exchange could buy the entire corn crop this year. Yeah. But it also highlights the fact that it's a very different market, and it's a very difficult market. And that's, again, if you want to be a farmer, it's the only business that you can do everything absolutely perfectly and still lose money.
So with the way the commodities have been going, and we know where they are right now, we know this, whether we're in a super cycle or not, and, prices are just off the charts for a lot of commodities. What say you?
Well, the farmers have had the benefit of much higher prices over the last 3 years. We had pandemic, inflation money comes into this market. You'll find a lot of hedge funds from New York will buy corn, beans, and wheat because they're assets that are going to inflate with inflation, right? So, but that trade's dead. It's gone. They've left the market, and we're looking at prices now that are probably 60% of what they were over the last 2 or 3 years. So, when it comes to beans, wheat, and corn, it's going to be a difficult year for farmers this year. If they can hope to break even or make just a little bit of money, that's not going to be too bad, having killed it the last 2 or 3 years. But they're not looking at this bountiful fall harvest like they had done the last 3 years. They've really done well, at least the last 2, maybe 3 years. This year is going to be a hope to break even and make a little bit.
Well, very, very well deserved, because I know that they have those years and, string them together where it is a complete struggle. I mean, it wasn't so long ago. I think we can all remember that farmers were not just living, paycheck to paycheck, if you will, but we're just struggling to the point of just having to close up shop.
The 1980s, you'll all remember Farm Aid, Waylon and Willie. I mean, trying to benefit because that, and guess what spurred that on? Inflation. It started early 80s, and inflation killed the farmer. And we're staring at an inflation problem here in this country now. And I mean, it's not exactly the same, but there's a lot of things that look very similar. And I tell you, the farmers struggling this year. It's going to be difficult. We'll see about next year, but they have had again a couple good 3-4 years. But every year is going to be different. And that's the other thing. Again, every year we regrow our stock. We reissue new stock every year.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Farm Aid, and that's closing bell. Holy cow! I'm glad you brought up Farm Aid, not for those reasons that farmers were struggling at the time, but brings back a pretty good time in my life. I was a young buck at the University of Illinois, and if you remember, that was the first Farm Aid concert was live in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, when I was a student there, and I attended it. That was pretty cool. So
I did not know that. I did not know that. That's pretty cool.
Yes, I am dating myself as well. I know you're a big Colorado buff, as one of my kids was, and you were actually a D1 athlete at Colorado, weren't you? You had a minute of fame or so on the offensive line, was it?
No, I was a defensive lineman. I was a nose guard, and right now, I'm doing my imitation of me playing football for the University of Colorado. I was a solid bench warmer. I made the traveling team, which was my claim to fame. When you get to travel with the top 60 guys. But it's D1's a different deal. I mean, it's a different deal. You thought you were good in high school. You show up to those places, and you're like, everybody's got a sack full of trophies, just like you do. And but that also shapes you. It was a different fraternity. I was in a fraternity. I was also on the football team, and then now I've got a fraternity of people like you in this finance space. But I look back on those days so fondly because of the lessons that it taught me. Just like growing up with my father working on our farm taught me. One of the things I say a lot is there are only two feelings that you're going to feel in this life. Really, if you boil everything down to two feelings, and that is either A, the feeling of disappointment, or B, the feeling of discipline. They're both hard feelings. The bad feeling of disappointment or the bad feeling of discipline, because they're both hard things to do. But one of them, obviously, you should choose, and that's not easy. And I heard Tom Brady talking about this the other day. The bad feeling of disappointment versus the bad feeling of discipline, it's much easier to do the discipline because there's a reward at the end of it, but not with the disappointment.
Well, my guess is, and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, my guess is you experienced both of those at the same time while you were on the football team there. The discipline of having to go out and bust your you-know-what every single day just to be part of that club, and maybe the disappointment of not playing. But my guess is the combination of that is what puts you in your role of success and where you are today.
Well, I thought a lot about that, Scott. It's interesting. Nobody's ever really asked me that question because when I was being recruited out of high school, you're the bee's knees. Everybody wants to talk to you. You're being flown to these different campuses around the country, and I remember being a senior in high school, and while we were practicing, just destroying kids on the team, and I'd be like, I wonder why this guy keeps showing up every day.
BMOC big man on campus.
But this guy was showing. These guys are showing up every day, and I'm destroying them. And I kind of felt bad a little bit about it, but at the same time, it's practice. You got to do what you got to do. Until I got to Colorado, and then all of a sudden, I was the one being destroyed. And I thought to myself, I get it now. They just wanted to be a participant and be part of the club and try to bring success in their own little way. They weren't going to be the star. They weren't going to get the headlines, but they wanted to have a little bit of ownership in the success of that entity. And that was a real big come to Jesus for me, because if I finally answered my own question, what are they doing this for? Well, I ended up being that guy. And that's what I did for. And you know what? To this day, I can't be prouder of my time as a bench warmer in Colorado because I still talk to a ton of guys. I'm still connected with the school that way, and it also taught me a lot of lessons. I say it 1,000 times. If it was easy, everybody would do it. I used to have a coach tell me that all the time. I mean, it turned out to be great. I couldn't be happier.
A lot of life lessons there to help get you to where you are today. All right, I am not going to take up any more of your time. I value our friendship. I look upon you honestly, and there's not a lot of people in this industry that I will look to for advice at times, quite frankly. And it's not because I'm arrogant or anything like that, but you get around here for 30, 35 years and you get in your own ways. You're one that I count on all the time. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to appear on your show and to help out. And I really thank you for being here. And I know that, our listeners here, they're going to love getting kind of the inside look to the cow guys, something that maybe they don't see on a daily basis.
Well, let's just say I likewise to you, Scott, and you've been a fantastic addition to the show, and I'll give you some kudos as well. And we appreciate all that you do and the content that you put in, and it's good. And you've got your own, each person's got their own little niche. You've got one that you fill for us that nobody else does, and we appreciate having you around as well.
That's awesome. Well, thank you very much. Remember, everybody, you can look him up, Cow Guy, but every day, Cow Guy Clothes, RFD TV. That's 1 o'clock Central, right?
1 Central, 2 Eastern.
Awesome. Can't thank you enough, Scott. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
Have a good one, buddy.
The Minds of Markets podcast is an exploration, a deep dive into the minds of some of the best traders and investors in the market. Our goal is to help you, the listener, learn from some of the best out there to improve your knowledge and skill set as a trader or investor. The Minds of Markets podcast should be used for information and entertainment purposes only. The opinions expressed in this podcast are our opinions only, and none of the information contained in this podcast constitutes a recommendation that any particular security, portfolio of security, transaction, or investment strategy is suitable for any specific person. Trading is risky, and past performance is not a guarantee of future results.